I often get asked by individuals who take my class in organizations, what is the most important aspect of Agile that I really need to hone in on if I want to be successful? And my answer is always the same. Communication wins every time. If you're doing Agile and you're not good at communicating, things are just going to fall apart. So, with that being the case, I thought it'd be a good idea to put together a short presentation about the top 5 communication keys that can help both individuals and organizations embrace and do Agile better. But before we get started, I wanted to give you a quick reminder about the podcast. I do have a podcast called the Agile Daily Stand Up Podcast. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe or listen, I highly encourage you to do so. It's every single day, Monday through Friday, always 15 minutes or less. And we'd love to have you join us and gain some insight about how to implement Agile within your organization. I've also thrown in a LinkedIn QR code there, as well as an information QR code. So that way, if you have any questions about this topic or any other topic, you can feel free to reach out to us at AgileDad. We'd love to hear from you. A little bit of background before we start. I've been at this Agile thing since 2012. My background is psychology based. I absolutely am passionate about all things Agile. And I'm so excited that I could be with you here today to get this presentation going and help you along in your Agile journey. So let's dive in. Let's get to the meat and potatoes. So I wanted to talk to you about Agile communication, the background, because many times what I've discovered is when people don't understand the why behind the what, there's a sense of frustration about what's being taught because there's no backstory about why we're doing this, where we're trying to go. So many moons ago, I had someone ask me if Agile was going to be dead. And I said, wow, it's 2024. Is Agile going to die? And my answer was not necessarily, but there's going to be some swift changes. And the changes that I saw all went around facilitation, decision-making, and transparency. Those were the 3 areas where I saw some changes. Facilitation has always been popular, but when most people think facilitator, they think Scrum Master, or they think Agile meetings. They don't necessarily zoom in or hone in on facilitation being all the other conversations that happen and support Agile practices within the organization. So if you're trying to gain better collaboration or team cohesion, in essence, you're going to have to find ways to communicate better. Now, this means that you may be modifying team working agreements. You may be modifying things within your Agile Center of Excellence. You might be changing things up, but it's important to give everyone an opportunity, especially if they're working in a remote or hybrid environment, that opportunity to really communicate better and work together with each other. It's really going to make a difference, and it's going to help teams and organizations hone in and do Agile better. The second is decision-making. In the past, we were always able to thoughtfully process decisions, process all the information, and make sure that we had good, efficient communication that led to clear decisions. Now, with the advent of AI and all these other things that are creeping in, we're starting to see the need for decision-making speed up. We're starting to see people who need to have decisions made faster. They need to know with confidence that the right decision is going to be made. And they try hard to really zoom in on a decision-making process and make it faster than it's ever been before. A swift decision is better than no decision. Even a bad decision is better than no decision. And I think that more and more organizations are starting to understand that the separator is being able to make decisions without delay. And finally, we talked about transparency and feedback. Transparency in the past has always been important, and transparency is still equally important. But the feedback piece is the piece that I think is going to change. In the past, we always had opportunities to gather and collect feedback, but we never really took time to process it accordingly. There are many organizations I've been to who said, we go through the motions of gathering all the feedback, but then we never do anything with it. And it was a point of contention and a point of frustration for many organizations. So my hope is that we can really leverage communication to get that feedback moving in the right direction so that we can make the feedback actionable. And I think that's the key. So many times organizations fail to make that feedback actionable. So my hope is that we can get it to an actionable state. So here's an overview of the top 5 keys we're going to cover. Now, we're going to go into much more detail in each one of these, but the top 5 keys that organizations may be missing, or the top 5 keys that they're not doing as well as they should, fall under active listening, which of course is communication technique that, you want to concentrate, understand, respond, and remember what's being said. Clear and concise communication. This is taking the information and leaving out all of the unnecessary fluff and ambiguity, being straightforward and succinct. Mastery of nonverbal cues. This is where you're going to learn about body language, facial expressions, gestures, tone of voice, all these different things that enhance your ability to communicate. Empathy. We're going to talk about how to understand the feelings of another person and how to be more effective and compassionate when it's time. And then, of course, constructive feedback. This is what you do, how you obtain constructive feedback, how you give constructive feedback, and then what you do behaviorally once you receive the constructive feedback. So all of these things play part in the constructive feedback and how we handle it. Now, once again, we're going to go through each of these in a lot more detail. So let's get started. So I think the biggest question that organizations need to understand is, why do we really need communication? Now, we can get the common answers. It puts us in better connection with our stakeholders. It aligns product ownership with delivery of our product or service. There are many powerful answers that can be stated for this question alone. However, I feel like there's an overarching answer that's kind of the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. Many people just don't get that Agile's not always easy. So this is the Agile landscape. Special kudos to Christopher Webb for putting this together. This has every single Agile framework outlined on it. Now, I'm not going to go through and try to describe each one to you, but I am going to tell you a small story about navigating this. Now, most people, when I look at this, say, oh my goodness, if Agile's that complicated, now I understand why we're failing. Now I understand why we're failing to communicate. But there's one key channel of communication that's missing that kind of is the aha that ties all this together. So if you look at the bottom, there are 4 black boxes. The first one says initiate, the second discover, the third deliver, and the fourth release. Each one of those, if you looked vertically, create 4 columns where the black box is the center of that column. If you look at this in a 4-column format, this landscape's going to make a lot more sense. So starting with initiate. Now, this is the part many people gloss over or bypass. This is where we say, hey, I have an idea. I think we need to do this XYZ project, or I think we need to do this better. This is ideation or initiation. Now, when organizations try to apply Agile, many times they hire people from all over, from many different organizations, and they create what I call the Agile melting pot, which in no way is a bad thing. In fact, I would argue it's a great thing. It's an amazing thing. The problem is when you get all these different people from different organizations, they all did Agile differently in their background, many with success within their previous companies. But when it comes to your company, if each individual in the organization is trying to apply Agile differently, there's certainly going to be a breakdown in communication. So this first step of ideation is listening to the idea and saying, that does sound like a good idea. Let's explore that idea and make sure we can validate that it's a good idea and make sure we're ready to propose or push it forward into the stage of discovery. Now, organizations do struggle in many cases when it comes to the need for ideation. Many organizations say, we're past that. We already know it's a good idea. We don't want to waste time or money there. And I would warn you ahead of time that that's a pitfall. This is a very inexpensive, if I were using like Yelp or Uber Eats $ signs, this is a $1 initiative. It's very, very inexpensive. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's worth every penny that you invest because it gives you a chance to brainstorm, to identify the top 5 ideas to solve a problem, to create a why-how ladder. It gives you all these different things that you can do that most organizations just gloss over or say they don't need. Once we've validated that that idea is a good idea, we can then move into the second phase, which is discovery. Now, discovery is very, very interesting. This is where our goal is to create an MVP, and that could be a prototype, a paper prototype, a quick diagram. It doesn't have to be something extremely detailed, but it's validation or verification that we've correctly identified our persona, that we have put together a solid elevator pitch for our target customer who is struggling or suffering from this problem. Our product or service is this type of product or service that provides this key benefit, a compelling reason to buy it. Unlike our competitor's product or service, our product or service provides this value, is different or better for these reasons. I think that those aspects are probably the most important thing on this entire on its entire landscape. The reason why I wanted to point those out is because without that level of communication and without that level of understanding regarding the persona, we are selling ourselves short. This step is only $2, but once we understand that, then we can start affinity clustering features, understanding the voice of the customer, and doing some mapping, whether it's relational mapping, context mapping, journey mapping, perspective mapping, empathy mapping, ecosystem mapping, story mapping, journey mapping. I think you get my point. And then once we have all these different mapping techniques, or the ones that we need in place, and you can select the ones you need, you don't need to do all of them, then you can put together a lightweight risk log, or maybe even a delivery plan for how it's going to pan out. But this is going to give you a very inexpensive view into who the targeted customer is and how we're going to apply our idea. The third step is delivery. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but delivery takes up nearly a whole third, if not half, of the screen. Delivery is the largest thing that you do, and it's $5. Now, the reason I point this out is because it's the most expensive thing you could possibly do because everyone's involved. But this is usually when people ask, is your organization doing Agile? This is usually where organizations say, of course we're doing the Agile. We do the Agile. And they're talking about all the things that are in delivery, whether it's sprint planning or product backlog design or retrospectives or reviews or demos or planning poker or estimation. Anything that you typically think of, anything that crosses your mind when you think of Agile is typically in this delivery box. Now, the problem comes when most organizations say, we don't need those first two things. We're doing Agile. We can just deliver and we'll be fine. What happens is when you bypass those things, I don't know if you see, but in the center of deliver, there's a circle, there's a loop, and it's got an arrow that goes around. In many organizations, we make the assumption that a product owner or product manager knows exactly what our product or service should be. We fail to communicate back with the key personas and our stakeholders to get clarification, and we go through the loop and deliver something. And when we deliver that product or service to our targeted persona, to our stakeholder, like, well, that's not exactly what I was looking for. And we go through the loop again and again and again, right? It's not the right rock. It's not big enough. Or now it's big enough, but it's got jagged edges. I want smooth edges. Oh, now it's got smooth edges, but it's the wrong type of rock. I wanted igneous, or I wanted sedimentary, not igneous or metamorphic. And then you go around again, and yeah, it's the perfect sedimentary rock, but now the customer's needs have changed, and they no longer want a rock; they want a stick, right? PTSD. I'm sure we've all been there before. When you're going through that loop that many times, oftentimes the customer's needs can change. And if the customer's needs change while we're going through that loop, if the customer's needs change while we're going through the loop, then we're starting all the way back over in discovery again. So what happens is in this most expensive cycle, we're going around and around and around the loop, spending a lot of our budget and not having the right level of communication. And then, of course, there's no money left when it comes to releasing a product, whether it's a product or service that's a physical product or service or something that's software related. We haven't set aside any of the money for that $2 sign delivery to make sure that we get the product or service to our consumer. So this is the problem identified. This is what we're trying to solve. We're trying to display or prove that by having proper communication techniques, you can better navigate from initiation all the way in the beginning, all the way down to release at the end. It's going to give you the path, the channel to go through for all 4 of those stages, which is going to be pretty cool. So we want to make sure that now that we've explained the importance of each one, we want to make sure that we don't get stuck in delivery and that we can navigate across from left to right. So the first key is active listening. Now, this is the one where many people say, got this, I understand active listening. But for some organizations, they don't take the time to break down active listening. So active listening isn't just, I can listen and I can solve a problem, right? In fact, I would argue there's 2 different types of listening. There's listening with the intent to reply, and there's listening with the intent to understand. And I think that sometimes if you hone in on active listening and say, I'm not just going to listen to what's being said with the intent of replying, but I'm going to listen with the intent of truly understanding what's happening. and make sure that I give my full dedicated attention so that I can comprehend all the details and nuances so that I can reduce any misunderstandings or errors, and so that I can make sure that I can almost repeat back what the person is saying. That's going to help me really, really, really push forward in communication. If I'm trying to get someone to know that I understand where they're coming from, sometimes when you're attentive and you show respect and you're not talking over people and you're understanding their viewpoint as well as your own, this fosters trust and helps build stronger relationships between individuals. And I think that sometimes we overlook those simple relationship building pieces. And then, of course, if you're trying to solve a problem, one of the best ways to solve a problem is to stop talking and start listening. Don't let your emotions or any underlying issues drive where you're trying to go. Figure out and listen to where people are, meet them where they are, and effectively collaborate to help find solutions that are acceptable to everyone involved. If you can get to that point, then you're active listening and then you're good to go. So active listening is a lot bigger and a lot more expanded than most people make it out to be. Let's go to the second key. The second key has to do with clear and concise communication. So when we go through clear and concise communication, once again, this sounds so common sense. It's like, oh, yeah, this is easy. But most people take for granted that, and I hear people say this all the time, did this require a meeting or could we have done it in an email, right? Or my favorite, I sent that to you on Slack, didn't you read it? Okay, both of these are perfect examples of how sometimes we've streamlined communication to the point that it's become ineffective. So for me, it's important to streamline and use the right channel of communication, but you want to make sure that the information you're trying to transmit follows the same vein and the same level of detail as was originally intended by the person who originally said it. I think that oftentimes we try to make it too concise, so we streamline it too much, or we take something very small and turn it into a very big thing and require a meeting and oversight and all these other things to happen. And either way, you're swinging a pendulum too far to one side or another. And this is one of those points where if we can get communication to be dead center instead of swinging the pendulum back and forth, it's going to reduce the amount of miscommunication we have. So instead of playing a telephone game, we're going to make sure that there's no room for misinterpretation. We're going to make sure all team members and stakeholders have consistent understanding of what we're being asked to do. And we want to make sure that when we leave any meeting, this is a good key. I learned this from Mr. Wonderful. So he said, when you leave a meeting, you want to make sure you call out my action items are XYZ and your action items are ABC. And what that does is it reinforces that everyone's on the same page and we understand exactly what the deliverable was for that meeting. And then, of course, if you do these things correctly and you have good communication, it's going to help speed up the cycle. You're going to have a good communication cycle. You're going to have faster response times. It's going to cut through all the unnecessary crap. It's going to let people quickly respond, and it's going to allow you to have more fast-paced change, which is exactly what Agile is all about. So that's clear and concise communication. All right, let's go to number 3. Let's talk about mastery of nonverbal cues. Now, this one's interesting. So when we talk about nonverbal cues, this ties into understanding and empathy, because you need to really look at facial expressions, gestures, posture. All these things provide you with information or clues. One of my favorite shows that I used to love to watch with my children when they were young was Blue's Clues, because the clues oftentimes weren't just verbal clues, because Blue didn't do a good job of speaking, but there were nonverbal clues. And the clues or cues that you get from others help you build rapport. They help you understand. And it signals that you're engaged and that you want to give and receive feedback. You can nod, you can maintain eye contact, you can do all these different little things that are going to help you through. But I think the big piece is, especially if you're trying to go through conflict resolution, especially if you're trying to resolve a major issue, sometimes it's so important for you to address things before they become explosive, before they escalate. And I think that if you understand how to use nonverbal cues to this point, it's going to really benefit you in engagement and in helping you best determine how to formulate the different things you can do and how you can engage better with people who may be struggling or going through an issue. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily take the nonverbal cues to heart. And I don't mean we don't take them to heart. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we take them to heart, but we don't act on the nonverbal cues. We don't take it further than, oh, that was a nonverbal cue. What do I do? And I think that the nonverbal cues are what's going to help us master communication. Those are the pieces that you really need to understand, whether you're from the back of the room, the front of the room, or in the conversation. You need to make sure you understand how to receive and accept nonverbal cues. Okay. So this is interesting because this has to do a lot with perception. And perception and nonverbal cues do kind of go together. So sometimes what people see on the surface is everything's fine, everything's good. Success is a beautiful iceberg. The sun is shining. We're in a sailboat. Life is good, right? But what people don't see are the levels of disappointment, the amount of dedication, the amount of hard work and good habits we had to establish, the amount of sacrifice that we had to make and things that we had to cut out of our lives to get there, the amount of failure that we had to overcome, and the amount of persistence it took to climb. 2/3, if not 3/4 of the iceberg is below the surface. And it's one of those things where even though the part above the surface is beautiful, what people don't understand is it takes a long time to get there. And the reason I bring this up is because sometimes those nonverbal cues come from disappointment. They come from dedication or stress over hard work. They come from establishing good habits or making sacrifices. And if we're not recognizing all those things that are happening under the water, it's going to be very difficult for us to really make someone shine above the water. And I think that too often we focus on everything above the water and pay no attention to what's happening under the water. This is just a good idea for us to refocus, retrain ourselves, get on the right page, and really dig into what these nonverbal cues mean and how we can support others in their efforts to really press forward. Okay, let's talk about number 4. Number 4 has to do with empathy. Now, empathy is one of those things, once again, where we look at it and we say, oh, I have empathy. I get it. But empathy is more than what most people make it out to be. So when it comes to empathy, this is the point where I talk about the 3 most powerful words that anyone in any organization could ever use. So any individual or any organization, the 3 most powerful words are help me understand. If you can leverage help me understand, empathy is going to allow team members to better understand and relate to each other's personal and work-related challenges. So this is where you're going to say, wow, that sounds crazy, or that sounds like a great idea. Help me understand how we're going to do that, or help me understand how this might be implemented, or help me understand what I can do to support you. And I think that sometimes if you have that supportive and inclusive culture that allows people to provide information and enrich what's going on, that's one sign of empathy. Of course, empathy improves conflict management. If you understand everyone's coming at it from a different perspective, if you understand that there could be disagreements or that conflicts are sure to arise, some of the best teams in the world, some of the strongest teams in the world, are the ones who have overcome conflict and have understood or used empathy to help leverage how they could do things better and promote harmony. So I think that these all do go hand in hand, and it makes sense, right? But I think that oftentimes we overlook empathy as a key. And of course, if you're trying to get your team back on a horse, back in the saddle, if you're trying to get them all back on the same page, and you want to boost their morale and encourage better engagement, empathy is the key. If people feel understood and valued, the morale and engagement both automatically increase. Everything is better when you have empathy. And I think that sometimes organizations don't put enough credit to empathy, or sometimes people say, yeah, I know what it is. Empathy. It's walking a mile in someone else's shoes, right? That's empathy. And I do that all the time because that's how I'm wired. That's what I do. But it's not just walking a mile in someone else's shoes. In fact, the original Indian proverb said, empathy is not just about walking in another's shoes. First, you must remove your own shoes. That's impactful because I think the key to understanding empathy isn't just understanding empathy. The key to understanding empathy is about understanding empathy without bias. It's about walking a mile in someone else's shoes, but remembering, hey, I got to take my own shoes off first, or else I'm not experiencing exactly what the other person or the other party's experiencing. And I think that if you apply empathy this way and you remember to take your own shoes off first, it's going to go a lot better for you and it's going to make a lot more sense for everyone involved. So there's your key. Empathy is not just about walking a mile in someone else's shoes. It's about taking your own off first. Okay, let's talk about the final key, number 5. So number 5 has to do with constructive feedback. Now, this is probably the most challenging of the 5 keys because this has to do with giving constructive feedback and receiving constructive feedback. So it's a two-way street. And I think that if you get to understanding constructive feedback, you're going to have continuous improvement. And continuous improvement means that it's going to be a flow that's always going, that it's always going to be in some form. It could be specific, actionable suggestions. It could be helping team members understand improvement in their performance. It could be how to adapt new methods or how to change what they're doing. It could be how to better engage and be more interactive in the Agile framework. It can encourage open dialogue and encourage trust within the organization. If we can be respectful and deliver feedback, both positive and negative, it's going to help us build trust and establish better relationships between team members. And finally, if you're trying to really execute on a task or execute on a project, this is going to help you with regard to efficiency. So if you give timely and direct feedback using radical candor techniques, right? Thank Kim Scott. We need to make sure that we can have the most efficient task execution and reduce time spent on misunderstandings so that we can cut through all the red tape and maintain a good momentum with what we're trying to do. We want to make sure we have solid momentum on our Agile projects and that everybody feels good about the direction that we're going. If we can do this and we have constructive feedback and we understand that constructive feedback can be either positive or negative, but we need to understand that we need to both be available to deliver the constructive feedback and receive the constructive feedback. If we can get that down, that's going to help us solidify how we do better Agile communication. So, next question is, that's great, Lee. We got the 5 keys. We're good to go. How do we integrate this into what we're doing? How do we apply these things that you're talking about into our Agile practice? How do we take the literal, hey, that sounds nice, and turn it into something that, hey, let's do it and make it something nice, right? And I think that you need to start by really understanding the context of what's going on and the group needs. So I learned this trick from the Walt Disney Company. They have something that they call winning. And I think that it starts by understanding the wants, interests, and needs of the people who are involved, whether these are internal people that you're working with in the workspace, or whether these are people who are recipients of your product or service. If you truly dedicate the time to understand what they really want, what their interests are, and what their current needs are, it's going to help you build better communication channels. You need to figure out about dynamics and things that change, as well as environmental norms and things that are going to be the same all the time, or things that have the potential to flow. And I think that if you understand those, the next step is to really assess where the team is on their team maturity model. Are they going through forming where they're brand spanking new and they're just learning about each other in a product? Are they in storming where there's some frustration or contention that they have to work through? Are they norming where they're in a good place? Or are they in that high performing stage where they're just like, wow, let's knock it out of the park? No matter where they are, we need to adjust our approach based on where the team is. And then I encourage organizations to create a list of open-ended questions to really start greasing the skids so that you have better communication. And if you can do this, you're going to end up creating an environment of psychological safety that's going to make it a lot easier for people to communicate and make it a lot easier for everyone to be on the same page. Now, I brought up psychological safety. In most organizations, I think they have a pretty good idea of what psychological safety is. So I thought I'd take it one step further and kind of give you the 4 quadrants of psychological safety, just so that you could see where each of these can be applied and whether you're applying it in each of these 4 places. So there's learner safety, collaborator safety, challenger safety, and inclusion safety. And in each one, they have different things that it's safe to do. So for example, in learner safety, it's safe to discover. It's safe to do that step, right? It's safe to do the ideation. It's safe to do discovery. It's safe to ask questions and experiment and try new things. It's safe for us to learn from our mistakes. We have to remember that FAIL is only an acronym. It's a first attempt in learning, right? We need to look for new opportunities, and it's safe to do that. We need to look for new ways to do things. When it comes to challenger safety, it's safe to challenge status quo and say, I know we've always done it that way, but is it right? It's safe to speak up. It's safe to express new ideas and identify changes. It's safe to expose problems and talk about them openly because we encourage that in an environment of psychological safety. When it comes to collaborative safety, it's safe to engage in an unconstrained way and interact with your colleagues, to have mutual access to everything that's available, to maintain full open dialogue and make sure everyone has a seat at the table, and foster constructive debate. Oftentimes I tell people, take the opposing view just so we can make sure we're not missing something. And that really works well. And then the last one is inclusion safety. And this is the one that I think people overlook the most. It's safe to know that you're valued. I hear a lot of people say, well, I don't want them to think they're doing too good or they won't work as hard. Oh my goodness, that's an old school management mentality, right? You need to let people know that they're valued. You need to treat everyone fairly. You need to feel your experience and ideas matter. This is all about diversity, equity, inclusiveness. Include others regardless of their title, position. Openly contribute and feel safe. These are all the things that you can do in your organization to really help foster that environment of psychological safety, to help really push it forward and get it from just being something that we talk about to something that we're actually doing. So psychological safety is incredibly important. And then the next piece is to understand facilitation arcs. Now, all of these different topics we've been discussing are part of the Agile Coaching Skills Certified Facilitator class. So these are things to help you as a facilitator take those keys of communication and apply them. So when we talk about facilitation arcs, this is our ability to sense and respond to group needs and create an agenda, right? Or to respond to their agenda. And we need to make sure that if we're trying to get from good to great, we need to leverage, help me understand. We need to leverage the acronym GROW. What are our goals? What's our current reality? What options or opportunities do we have? What will we commit to do today? And I think that if we can leverage that, it's going to help us focus on having an open mindset, and it's going to help us ask those deep open-ended questions that are going to lead to better conversation. So I think you need to really get your head around what good to great looks like. So what I've done is I've included a facilitation arc example for you to go with so that it gives you some idea of what this looks like. So the first step right out of the gate is we need to create an environment. How would you like to be coached? How would you like to be spoken to? How would you like to engage? What type of communications work best for you? Create the container, create the environment. Then we go through discovering the problem. What is the real problem we're trying to deal with? Is it that agile landscape where we're trying to get from left to right? In this case, that's the problem. But what is the problem in the organization that you're trying to overcome? Then you need to identify and discover options to keep the momentum going and support and encourage the team and get them excited about what we're trying to do. And then we'll select which option we think, what are you going to do about this, right? So we're using the model that we talked about before, GROW. What are our options? What are we going to do, right? And I think that if we narrow down our options and we understand how to hold each other accountable, this is going to go a lot better. And then finally, what will you do today? That's the call to action. It ends with feedback, acknowledgement, and commitment. This was the Mr. Wonderful piece I was telling you about. Here's your call to action. Here's my call to action. And that's what we're going to do. And this is all built on top of a foundation of asking the right powerful questions. If you ask open-ended powerful questions, all of this flows together and works really, really well. But if you limit yourself, this is all going to be a struggle. So this is the application key, if you will. So this is the key to the map. This is the application key to doing the 5 keys successfully. So this is how you apply them, which is super duper cool. Okay, it's your chance right now. Now is the time to advance your communication skills. Now is the time for you to do better. And whether that means you're going through an Agile Coaching Skills Certified Facilitator class, where you can learn deep dive, about 2 days worth, a lot more about these techniques and how they can be applied. Or whether it's I'm going to take action and take some of those first steps and go through the 5 keys and assess and see exactly where we are. I think that either of those 2 techniques are going to bring you a lot closer to where you need to be. So let's get some final thoughts out there, because I want to make sure that you understand the best way to communicate and the best way to facilitate. So communication isn't just about exchanging information. You need to be prepared, right? And I think that sometimes organizations don't take the time to prepare, or they don't take the time to study these good techniques in order to be prepared so that this can go a lot more smoothly. So if you're trying to foster an environment of trust, to create that container, the space where everyone's voice is heard and they feel valued, if you're trying to really dig in, everything that we discussed today, active listening, making sure you're on top of it, that you understand, that you're being empathetic, that you're having clear and concise communication, that you're mastering those nonverbal cues and understanding where people are coming from, that you don't only understand empathy, but you understand empathy without bias, that you're walking in without your own opinion, and that you're using constructive feedback as a mechanism to give feedback and receive feedback. I think that if you piece that all together, these are so much more than just tools. These are literally the building blocks to really have perfect, robust, agile communication. These are the building blocks that are going to help you really communicate better in the workspace. These are the things that are going to enhance your clarity, give you greater collaboration skills, and really get everyone on the same page. So next steps, I'm going to challenge you. Take those 5 keys and create a checklist, if you will, and assess where you are today. If it's something you're doing really well, give yourself a check mark. You're doing it well, you're on fire, you're great. If it's something that you're doing, but there's room for improvement, give yourself a hyphen or a dash. If it's something you feel like this is a real struggle for our organization, or it is an area where we can have great improvement, give yourself an X. It's okay. And then what I want you to do, this is the homework piece, is set your calendar for 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days out, and go through this list again. And maybe as part of a retrospective, call out improving one of these as one of your goals. And then at the next retrospective review, and ask yourself, hey, how did we do on that one? So that way you can apply these things and get a checklist back and say, okay, let's get some feedback. And then you can openly discuss the feedback as you go, because that's going to help you really enhance your communication. It's going to help you really be more responsive, and it's going to help you get that good feedback loop going so everyone feels encouraged about what they're trying to do in your organization. So top 5 keys one last time, just to make sure you didn't miss any. Number 1, active listening. Number 2, clear and concise communication. Number 3, mastery of nonverbal cues. Number 4 is empathy without bias. And number 5 is constructive feedback. If you could use this as your checklist, this is what's going to propel you and help you really accelerate communication in your organization and help you really get your head around everything that you should be doing. So I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for being here today. If you want to learn more about this, of course, you can visit AgileDad.com. We'd love to hear from you. Learn more at AgileDad.com is the email address. You can look on YouTube. We have hundreds of videos available. And we want to say thank you so much for spending this time with us. We hope you have an amazing, wonderful experience. And until next time, do take care. Bye now.